if we just focus on inflation, the answer is yes, things get more expensive.
Sure.
But if we focus on the relationship of the cost of things and the income we receive, things are getting more expensive, but our income also generally goes up most of the time.
Yeah.
Right. So if we just choose to focus on, am I maximizing my income? That's one way that we can say, yeah, things are more expensive, but I'm also making more money.
Welcome to Money Therapy, where every dollar tells a story. And most importantly, so do you. I've explored thousands of podcasts discussing tools, tricks, and hacks to grow wealth. But when they failed me, I started asking why. The answer was clear. For a different output, I needed different inputs. So I shifted my focus from mere tools to more deeper sense of self. I started focusing on my identity, beliefs, values, goals, and vision. Once these were aligned, the same tools that were failing me before started to work. Join us at the intersection of life and money, where you are the ultimate asset in generating wealth for your life. Let's master our money, not be mastered by it. Don't forget to like, subscribe, follow, and share for your weekly dose of money therapy, helping you turn wealth into a seamless part of your life's journey. Together, we're going to eliminate financial anxiety and hopelessness and gain confidence and clarity. Now, let's dive into today's episode of Money Therapy.
All right. Welcome to another episode. We're glad you're here. Bill,
What's going on?
How are you?
Doing all right, man. How are you?
Oh, I did need to tell you this story.
Okay.
Yesterday, I have like season tickets to the local baseball team here in Nashville, and my brother's in town right now.
Cool.
So last night we had a plan. We had a driver, but we both completed the 9, 9, and 9 challenge. Are you familiar with the 9, 9, and 9 challenge?
I'm not.
So the 9, 9 in 9, 9 hot dogs, 9 beers, 9 innings, right?
Wow.
Yeah. So it was
Impressive.
it was probably the hardest. I mean, I've like fought the Taliban. I have been in one of the largest, like the biggest battles against the Mahdi army. I have fought the hardest, most trained fighters that ISIS has ever created. This could have possibly been the hardest thing I've ever done. And I've never felt more American. We ate so many hot dogs that we sold out the club level of hot dogs. We bought their last one.
I don't know if fellow service members are going to be proud of you or
they will be very proud. No, they will be very proud. 9, 9, and 9. If you've never done it, try it. I recommend it highly.
Sounds like
it's
hell.
just it's very hard. It was I mean,
dude, I couldn't eat 9 hot dogs, period.
It was I will never do that again. I don't know if I could ever eat a hot dog again, not for a while. I'm over those. All right. So let's jump in.
Is there a stipulation that you can't get sick, or are you allowed to get sick?
I think it's for you to define your own challenge. The rule is 9 hot dogs, 9 beers, 9 innings. That's all I know. So,
well, at least you were responsible about your binging. You know.
Yeah. We made sure we had a very good plan, and
good,
honestly, the 9 beers was not the issue, and there was so many. Like I had 9 hot dog buns in me. I think I could have drank 900 beers and been fine, but we made sure we were safe. And
it's like 20,000 grams of carbs.
Highly recommend trying it though. Let us know if you tempted or have. Love to
if
love
you
to hear
succeed,
the story.
Put your comments in the comment section.
And compare notes. I felt very American, very accomplished. So let's jump to the show notes. I was sitting on my couch. I don't know, last week, thinking about like the next episode. Like, what do I want to write about, or what do we want to speak about? And I was just kind of like looking out the windows. I got like a ton of windows on the back of my house, and it all just kind of points toward nothingness and trees, right? So, but I was looking at the trees and I was like, hey, the trees are really green today.
Yeah.
And I was like, when did that happen? Like, when did all of a sudden, because like, you know, a few months ago there were no leaves. Like they weren't green, right?
Right.
And I you know, over the past couple months, I didn't like notice the slow change. It was just like all of a sudden I'm like, man, like the trees are green now. Like it just happened.
Yeah.
And so once I started thinking, I was like, that's kind of unique. And that's really kind of what led to today's show thoughts. Well, on the silent wealth killer is, you know, the same kind of feeling can often happen as a result of inflation, right? The silent wealth killer is inflation.
Yeah.
And it's the same kind of feeling, right? Like you go to the store and like, man, when did everything get so expensive? Like it just all of a sudden is so, it just feels there's like this tipping point. So I want to introduce this thought with a couple fun facts. I'm 40 years old. And so my birth year was 1984. That is the midpoint. So if 40 years ago was 1984, 1944 was 40 years before 1984, right? So kind of like the midpoint between, I was born between 1944 and now, which is crazy to think about.
Yeah.
Right. That's pretty wild. So I'm further away from my birthday than I am my birthday from 1945. That's another way to say it. Anyway, that just made me think like, man, you know, in 40 years, the world's changed quite a bit. There are plenty of people who are 80 years old. And I'm just like, how much change do they have to embrace to be 80 years old today? But I was thinking about like the cost of a cheeseburger back in 1944. I was thinking about like the cost of a gallon of gas, the cost of a house, the cost of all these things. And, you know, we're thinking and talking a lot about inflation nowadays, and things are getting more expensive. So the whole show, the whole thing that I want to talk about is really, how do we fight that? How do we combat it? How do we overcome it? How do we deal with it? How do we succeed? And how do we not let inflation kill our wealth?
Yeah. Well, I think it's, you know, number one, I heard this recently, but 90% of fixing a problem is understanding that there is a problem and being able to identify it. So, you know, if we are looking at inflation and we're talking specifically about money with people and money with clients, you know, we do a lot of explaining of how inflation, you know, we call it inflation risk, right? And what does that look like in our society? But then we also do a lot of explanation of what we call other types of risk, like, you know, how far your dollar goes, you know, and it's escaping me right now, what that term is, of course, but, you know, there's a risk that your dollar doesn't go as far as it does, you know, in a year from now, or if too much money is sitting in a bank account, for instance, maybe you're missing out on other places where it could be growing either with inflation or more than inflation to preserve the buying power of your dollar later. So I think just number one, recognizing that in 25 years, things are going to be, or in, you know, your case, 40 years, it's going to be a lot different. I mean, in 1978, so almost 40 years ago, it's the most relevant number that I could find. A McDonald's cheeseburger was 40 cents. And today it's $2.89. So it's a tremendous increase. Now, you know, other things have increased with that as well. But
well, I want to talk about that for a second, because you brought up a really good point when you were really talking about like having the same conversation about how expensive things are.
Yeah.
But I think you present it in a way like, how do we really focus about keeping our feet on the ground? Because you talked about like a lot about ratio, right?
Yeah.
Things are more expensive, but income is better, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And
So
I think there's one of the stats that I saw, it's like, I think ratios are very important, especially, we talk about cutting through the noise a lot on this podcast, which is, okay, we hear all this stuff about inflation. Inflation in the news today is, the topic of concern, and people are talking about it and interest rates consistently, but they don't really ever talk about how technology or the marketplace brings down prices at the same time as your salaries, your earnings are inherently going up year to year. Now, are they, they love to talk about whether or not they're keeping pace with inflation and stuff. But like, one of the examples I saw was, gas in, let's see, gas in 1984 was $1.13.
Mhm.
Okay. If you extrapolate that out with inflation, that's $3.17 in today's money, which is exactly where gas prices are. So, but we've, for the past 40 years, people complain about how high gas prices are. Right. So, anyway, I think ratios are very important, because obviously the household income in America is tremendously more than it was 40 years ago. So I want to do a whole episode on that later, but yeah, I just thought it was kind of interesting how we tend to forget about 3 or 4 different, variables in that equation, and we just focus on the inflation part of
Yeah.
it.
So just to like kind of summarize what you just said to make it, I mean, hopefully just to grasp this at a very simple level
Yeah,
is if we just focus on inflation, the answer is yes, things get more expensive.
sure.
But if we focus on the relationship of the cost of things and the income we receive, things
Right.
are getting more expensive, but our income also generally goes up most of the time.
Yeah,
Right. So if we just choose to focus on, am I maximizing my income? That's that's one way that we can say, yeah, things are more expensive, but I'm also making more money.
yeah,
And if we so I think what's really unique about that, and this is just kind of hitting me, and because I talk a lot about when we talk about cash flows, we
yeah,
have to focus on income
sure.
first. Like that has to be it because that's what we can control.
Yeah,
And so people that are just hearing this noise, hearing the news about inflation and getting scared and be like, I can't afford groceries. You're
right.
you're just basically putting yourself in a
Like a
not like
vacuum.
an unwinnable situation. You
Yeah,
have no control over the cost of groceries.
right.
But if you realize that there's a relationship, right? If something's expensive, we
Yeah,
only know it's expensive because there's relationships to things that are either less expensive or things we have money for.
yeah,
And that uh, uh, piece of information is based on our income. So if you
yeah.
start thinking things are expensive, start thinking, how do I make more money?
Yeah. And I think one of the other main points I'm trying to make too is it's not a two-dimensional black and white issue. There's a lot of different variables, and like, just, as an example, like the technology space is such a crazy example of that. I mean, 15 years ago, a, 60-inch TV was like $3,000.
Mm-hmm.
And now Costco is giving away TVs at 85 inches or whatever they are for like $500.
It's true.
Right. So now, obviously, like, you don't necessarily need an 85-inch TV. You do need food. So, but I'm just using that as an example to say that it's a complex situation. And so when we deal with money and we look at people's situation, you're absolutely right. We have to look at where you're at today. But we also, that's why we talk about making a plan that's a lot more flexible, because there are going to be things in our economy that change. Technology will get better. Things may maintain their price, such as gasoline, as we discussed, or they may go tremendously down, like in technology, and make living as a whole a lot easier or cheaper, or be able to live, a lifestyle that's better than where you are today for the same price as today. So it's a very complex issue, and I think that's where the planning, a very flexible thing, and looking at all the different dynamics of it is very important.
I want to take just 1 second to kind of validate people though that do feel like things are getting expensive, just by
Yeah,
putting something in perspective. And I think this is really important because you need to understand the goal with it, like in and around inflation. Okay.
right.
So the goal is not to get to a point where prices come down. right? The Federal
Right.
Reserve has goals. The Federal Reserve is really the ones that can like, impact and have effect on inflation.
True.
Policy, U.S. policy global policy tends to also impact inflation. But the
Sure.
Fed has a lot of power when it comes to inflation. The
Yeah.
goal is not to get prices flat. The
Right.
goal is not to decrease prices, or in this case, deflation. The goal is to get inflation to about 2% a year.
Yeah.
So everything should always be about 2%. That's a magic number because generally speaking, with GDP, people's incomes can rise also at about 2 to 2.2% a year.
Yeah.
Now, why this is important is because normally in life, you don't feel the things are getting more expensive because normally in life your income is coming up maybe even a little more than what the price of goods are going up. That's
Right.
normal. However, there are times like we're in right now where for more than a year we're not like inflation was like at 9% and then 6%, right?
Yeah.
And now we're finally kind of at 3, getting close to 2.
Yeah.
This also happened back in the 70s.
Yeah.
Inflation rates were like 7.1%. And then they finally, it took almost till 1990 for them to finally taper back down to like the 2 to 2.5, 3% range.
Yeah.
So it was a long fight. And in that time, prices rose aggressively. So people were really feeling the pinch
Yeah.
when it came to spending. So I do want to say, like, right now, because the ecosystem is slightly skewed towards like limited supply, lots of demand, prices are higher, and it's been higher now for a few years. So it's outpacing that, and it just ebbs and flows, right? So we're
Yeah.
on our way back. We're getting really close to where we'll be more in that normal range of, hey, things are going to get more expensive, but so my
Yeah.
income will catch up the same.
Yeah. I kind of want to jump to some, we were talking about this in show notes and kind of comparing notes. And I think this is a great little segue into, we were talking about, risk earlier. And then we're talking about, in this instance, price of groceries and things going up. I love how it sounds when you say the misconception. There's a misconception out there as that cash is a haven. And we've argued about this, like a penny saved is a penny earned and all that stuff. And we've, argued the nuance. And I love that argument. So I want to pick on you a little bit. What do you mean by the misconception of cash as a haven? Because people always think, hey, if I got cash, I'm okay.
Yeah. So this, again, we have to talk about, the show Silent Wealth Killer.
Yeah.
All right. So let's personify the silent wealth killer.
Yeah.
And when you go into a fight, so in the military, when we go into a fight, even like as an MMA fighter or as a boxer, whatever your fight is, if you go into a fight, you want to have an element of confusion, right? You need your opponent, your enemy, to be slightly confused. So
I feel the same way about when I'm about to attack a cheesburger.
There you go.
You want it to be confused. Less intense, but that's relevant for my life, I guess.
So the idea of having a silent like wealth killer, it relies on people to make bad decisions amidst chaos, right? Like when we were going to fight in Afghanistan or Iraq, like, you've seen it on shows if you haven't actually participated in it, like the use of like flashbangs, right? Like there's psychological operations that you want that chaos and you want that confusion to hit so people aren't capable of making great decisions.
Yeah.
So
makes a
when
lot
we
of
talk
sense
about the misconception of cash, this is the favorite weapon of the silent wealth killer. Because what people during periods of time when inflation is high, generally economies and markets are nervous. We're tiptoeing. It's like walking on thin ice. And sometimes it's actually not good. It's very like sometimes markets can get really bad for a little bit because of this. Economies can be hurt because of this. So people tend to feel safe in cash.
Yeah.
Okay. So why is that a misconception is because if things are getting 9% more expensive or 7% more expensive, or even this year, if things are getting 3% more expensive, if you have
Mhm.
$100 in your hand and you wait a year to spend it,
Yeah.
you don't have the same purchase power that you had a year ago,
Yeah.
right? So
Makes sense.
sometimes cash can make me feel safe, but
Yeah.
it's actually like I wish I could just bang my hands on the desk really loud and hard and scream into the mic and say cash is just it's a safe way of going broke.
Yeah.
You,
Yeah. It's a good way to.
you feel yeah, you're
Yeah.
getting broke while feeling safe.
And I
And
want to jump in here
go
if I
ahead,
can,
please.
and to provide kind of the other, aspect of the argument, if you will, or how I try, and I'll give you a little perspective on how I try and help some of my clients with this, and how I try and kind of convey that message. Is that doesn't mean we have 100% of everything that we own in stocks or real estate or investments, right? You got to have a little cash. We talk about emergency funds all the time. However, there are places you can put your emergency fund to mitigate that inflation risk.
Mhm.
So, for instance, right now money markets are sitting around 5%. Is it as good as 7 or 9%? No, you're still losing money, right? But it's way better than 0.02% you're getting at the bank. And so the other way I try and convey that with clients, and then Brandon, I want to know how you try and convey, because again, most people don't even think about this. So as financial advisors, we have to bring it to light and get them to think a different way. But the way that I talk about it with people is, hey, if you're a young couple, and it depends greatly if you own a home or not, or what your situation is. But I usually try and tell like somebody who's 20 to 30s, like, or even 20 to 40, like, it's possible that having more than $20,000 in your account is too much cash because we're taking too much risk of that buying power later just sitting there. If I have a retired couple, that cash position is typically significantly more. And we talked about this last week, and that little changes today make big changes over time. So again, if you're 82 and you're retired, you're not too worried about inflation too much. It's not eating away too much at your purchasing power that it's going to destroy your entire financial, picture. But if you're 20 and inflation is different than what we expect, that can have a tremendous impact. So having less cash if you're younger so that you can invest more to mitigate that risk is kind of the rule of thumb that I have that's in my head is, and again, there's situations where, hey, you need more cash right now, let's just sit tight. Everyone's situation is different, but that's kind of how I try and convey it. Can you talk a little bit, like how do you try and talk about that subject with clients?
Yeah, I think it's just about having a plan and getting very intentional
Okay.
with where and how we allocate our dollars. I tell
Sure.
people that to be protected and safe,
Yeah.
it's going to cost you money, right? It
Yeah.
like you don't have a private security detail for free,
Right.
right? So if you needed security, if you needed if you needed security detail, like you're gonna pay like artists pay a lot of money, right, for their
Yeah.
security, right?
Yeah.
So in the same sense, if we want an emergency savings account to keep us safe, we
Yeah.
should expect to have to pay for that. So
Yeah.
you're right in differentiating.
Yeah.
I'm not saying have no cash.
Right.
I'm saying the notion of cash is my safety because it protects me from loss is a misconception
Yeah.
because you are actually losing. It is costing you to hold cash. Now, and where it's dangerous is if we're holding cash that should be buying assets and
Yeah.
making money and growing wealth,
Yeah.
but we're not doing that because we're afraid. So we're just holding cash. So
Yeah.
if you have $10,000 in an emergency savings account next year, even if that savings account is still 10 grand, we have to add more money to it because more than likely your spending's gone up, your
Sure.
income's gone up. So to have an effective savings account, we're actually paying money to that account
Yeah.
as a security detail to keep us safe.
So
You
I
brought
want
up
to.
go ahead.
Oh, I didn't mean
I was just
to.
gonna you brought up a good point, and we can kind of jump into this next. Like you said this like a couple weeks ago, and it was a really good thought that you kind of alluded to the fact that really depends like how dangerous is inflation. You
Yeah.
know, it depends on where you're at in life. And you kind of
Yeah.
just alluded to this again, so it kind of resparked this. But
Right.
when I work with people, I break them down essentially into 4 categories. So like imagine like 4 avatars in your
Yeah.
head and ask
Sure.
which one am I now and which one am I next?
Yeah.
Right. So at like
I like that.
avatar number 1 is an aggregator. All right. These are typically the people that are entering the workforce. They're young, lots of debt, maybe new home debt, school debt, car debt, like all the stuff, right?
Sure.
They're competing. They're not making much money because they're in entry level positions, but they're young. They got a long time ahead of them. So we worry about different things. We worry about specific things for them, right? Usually it's debt strategies. It's about increasing income, efficiencies, and cash flows, things like that.
Yeah.
Then you
I
go
want
into
to take
go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I'm just jumping all over it. My bad.
Go for it.
Well, I was just going to jump back before we kind of head down. I really think that thought's really interesting. I want to jump back to the emergency fund thing because I always want to try and paint a picture too with us because I think we have very healthy disagreements and stuff. So I want to kind of challenge your thought on that and see what you think about this. So to jump back, if that's okay, we have $10,000 in an account and we know that next year it's going to be worth less, via inflation, right? But I do want to say to the listener out there, it's a better alternative than not having any cash. And then when a $10,000 emergency happens, you got to put it on a credit card at 25%, right? So we'd be losing 25% as opposed to maybe 4% or 2% on inflation in really good years. Do you see what I'm saying? And do you agree at all with that?
I think emergency savings are part of a very important part of a holistic financial strategy. So I'm not disagreeing that anybody should not have an emergency savings. I think it's based on your tolerance with risk, how much you should have.
Sure.
I think, I call it a sleep at night number. How much money do you need in your mattress to fall asleep at night?
Yeah.
That's kind of the question that I always ask. I don't care. Like there's a million strategies. The reality is once you're making really good money and once you have a lot of assets, you can care a little less about the emergency savings kind of thing.
Sure.
So I think it's really, I work with a lot of like high net worth people and they don't have emergency savings accounts.
Interesting.
So I think it's just about the stage that you're at in life and how much risk you want to take. And so I'm not advising anyone to not have an emergency savings account. That's not what I'm saying.
I didn't
the
say
misconception of cash is everything that I own is in cash because I'm scared. So I'm safe. I'm scared of everything else out there right now.
Yeah.
So everything I own is in cash.
Yeah.
You're not being safer. You're actually still falling prey to reinvestment risk, longevity risk, inflation risk, all these different types of risk. They just don't, they're secret. They're in disguise. They don't feel like risk. So you feel safe and you're being attacked. Right?
Yeah.
That's what you don't want. So
Couldn't
allocate assets, allocate dollars, allocate money, allocate your wealth appropriately.
Yeah.
But just sometimes we feel safe with cash. That's the misconception because we're not always, all cash is not safe.
Awesome. Yeah. I couldn't agree more with that for sure.
So I want to again, just hitting these different stages of life, aggregators, pre-retirees, early retirees, and late stage retirees. I really just want to make sure that, to your point, Bill, what you were saying, it depends on where you're at in life, how big of an impact inflation is going to have. Sure. And based on where you're at in life is going to really start to tell us how to combat the risk of inflation, right?
Yeah.
We need to do things differently with the people in their 20s, 30s, and 40s than we do the people's in their 50s and 60s than we do the people's in their 90s, right? So these different avatars, how we combat the risk of inflation, how do we fight back? It really depends on what stage of life you're in.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think, our job too as financial advisors, again, is to always be looking at the whole argument and different sides. And I think you do a really good job of this. You're always you make a plan and you do a lot of research and then you try and poke holes in your own plan to see where, we're constantly taking in different opinions to try and challenge us, in case we're missing something, so for somebody who is retiring, and we alluded to this, like inflation may not be the biggest risk because maybe all of, most of their income is on Social Security, which is going to be cost of living adjusted, right? So that's kind of pre-built in. Whereas somebody who's 20 years old, and as everybody out there listening probably is aware, Social Security is going to look a heck of a lot different probably when we're ready to retire in our generation than it does for somebody retiring tomorrow. And we don't know what that's going to look like, right? But we know it's going to have pretty big effects. So how do we adjust for that in the financial plan? Maybe that's relying less on Social Security. Maybe that's making sure our emergency fund is in a money market, beating the bank at all point in time that we can. Maybe that means having as much invested for our future in different ways for different avatars along the way. Maybe that's, it could be real estate. It could be the stock market. It could be all kinds of, different things. But looking at the whole argument as a whole, I think is really important for your stage of life. And again, building that investment strategy that's tailored to you, that is flexible in almost every way that we possibly can, make sure that it can adapt to all those different changes.
Yeah, I think, the question through all of this is what do we do about it?
Yeah.
Like there's this silent killer lurking, and I want to be more dangerous than him. I need to beat this silent wealth killer. So how do I, arm myself? How do I, survive? And the reality is, again, based on your stage of life, this is one of those things where it is a very real threat, but it's so unique and so situational that you need, this is one of those places where you need to go seek advice.
Yeah.
Right. You need to meet some people. But I will tell you this, any advice that you're seeking, because I think sometimes people listen to us because they want to know where to turn for good advice.
Yeah.
Any advice to combat inflation generally boils down to owning an asset. There's a million different types of assets to own. There's riskier ones. There's less riskier ones. Tips, bonds, government bonds that adjust to match the inflation at the time. Those are really good, relatively safe spaces to put your money. And then you could also own publicly traded private companies. You could own, housing or buildings or whatever the case may be. But typically the advice should be centered around owning some sort of asset. That is the best way to combat inflation. So, but seek advice, and the advice for a 20-year-old, for a 30-year-old is going to look different from an advice of a 50 or 60-year-old versus a 90-year-old. So it should not be the same plan for everyone.
Yeah. We talked about it, preparing for all different weather conditions last week. Like it may not even be your problem, and that's why you're seeking advice. Like, do I even have to worry about this? I mean, I had a real quick funny story. I mean, I had a client that, we were just in money markets and CDs because that's all that they wanted and could tolerate. And every time I talked to this person, he was, commenting on the ups and downs of the stock market. Oh, the market's crazy. And I just started laughing the one day. I'm like, you're not even in the stock market. Like, what are you talking about? Like, so anyway, like figure out, through advice and through your different channels and becoming aware of the situation and aware of that silent killer. Make sure that the person that you're seeking advice from is educating you on the entire picture, and if it even pertains to you. And then if it does, how do we create that plan to make sure that we're taking care of it from what we can control?
Yeah. I think it's so important to plan and own assets. That is how you beat inflation. That's how you beat the silent killer, is make a plan, have a plan, adjust the plan, evolve the plan, revisit the plan, apply the plan. And then own assets. That's it.
Yeah.
All right.
Plan to plan.
Thanks for listening. And, like, subscribe, share, comment, feedback, emails, reach out to us. We're here for you guys, and we appreciate you. We'll see you next week. Bill?
See everybody next week. Adios.
We hope you learned something valuable today. We appreciate you including us in your journey towards financial betterment. It is important to us that you know this is for educational purposes only and not to be considered specific advice for any individual listener. If something we discussed is relevant to you and you have questions about how it might be uniquely applicable to you, please discuss that with a financial professional, or, of course, we are happy to have further conversations with you about your specific questions, needs, or circumstances. We welcome you to reach out to us via our website, harpethwealthpartners.com, or by emailing Brandan at bmc@harpethwealthpartners.com. Securities are offered through LPL Financial, member FINRA SIPC. Investment advice is offered through Private Advisor Group, a registered investment advisor. Private Advisor Group and Harpeth Wealth Partners are separate entities from LPL Financial. The opinions voiced in this material are for general information only and are not to be intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. To determine which strategies or investments may be suitable for you, consult appropriate qualified professionals prior to making a decision. Investing includes risk, including fluctuating prices and loss of principal. No strategy assures success or protects against loss. All performance referenced is historical and is no guarantee of future results. All indices are unmanaged and may not be invested into directly. Hypothetical examples presented are not representative of any specific investments. Your results may vary. We want to thank you for your time, and we look forward to having you back next week.